Thanks, everyone. I'm going to spend 15 minutes giving a quick talk. The main thing I hope you get from it is, I think when I think of quantum computing, I think we've been in 3 phases. I'm going to call the first phase, quantum was cool. And I think we're basically done with that. We've seen a lot of people using quantum computing. I'm going to give you why I think we're entering this phase of utility. I'm going to show you some preliminary results and why I think we're getting into how we can do useful. And then I don't have time, but I think will be a third phase, which I call quantum-centric supercomputing, which I've talked many times about in the past. But I don't think it's impossible that within the next 10 years, machines of order 100,000 qubits are available. So IBM Quantum. I'm sure I've heard IBM a few times. I'm sure you all know what IBM Quantum is. But our mission is pretty simple. Our mission is to focus on bringing useful quantum computing to the world and at the same time make the world quantum safe. I'm not going to focus on the second. My technical lead will be on a panel later, and they can go into some introductions into that. So when I think about users, I think about actually 3 different key personas. I just heard about the quantum physicists. I'm a physicist, but I agree that it's time that we move beyond the physicists. I think in this quantum was cool phase, we were studying benchmarking systems, coming up with pulses, improving circuits. We're, of course, going to continue to need that. Enterprises, we work with many enterprise clients. We heard from many on the panel. Yes, we need to start to understand use cases. But there's this middle one in here that I don't think we as a community speak enough about. I call them the quantum computational scientists. And what I imagine by them is how do we start to use quantum computing as a tool, yes, mixed with classical computing, to start to look at things where we'll get to what I mean by utility, start to investigate problems that we can't do with a classical computer and start to go forward. When we've talked to many of these people that I would put in this category, I hear 3 things. First, they're not aware of the current status of quantum. So I think things like this conference is a great thing. We're talking a bit too much to the same people. How do we communicate to new users where the status of it is? They want simple tools. They want it to be frictionless. They don't want to deal with the noise of the system. So on that, and following on from the talk I gave last year, I'll give a little bit update on, I think there's 3 no-nonsense paths. One is how do we get to this word of quantum advantage? How do we go from where we are today as quick as possible to seeing something we can't do classical? I'll give a little bit update on what I call the no-nonsense path to how we continue to make improvements in the performance of these systems. And then lastly, I'll give a little bit of update on how we make it frictionless so that we can use these systems. If we can put these together, my 2 biggest OKRs that I'm most excited by, and I'll show you why, is their IBM Heron processor. The first one is coming out this year. It is a beautiful device. The version 2 is going to be even better. And then the IBM 100 by 100 challenge. This is a challenge that we've set. By the end of 2024, you're going to be able to execute on our systems 100 qubits with a circuit depth of 100, which gives you a sort of volume of doing. And correct for the errors to be able to get some observables back in basically less than a day is our goal. If we can combine both of these, this is what I think we can get to for the utility of quantum computing. So let's start on the first. So the traditional, why we're all excited by quantum computing is we've got this black curve here. This black curve is this down the bottom. You don't really need to know what it is, but just think of the complexity of the workload that runs on the quantum computer. We're so excited by quantum computing because if we go and try and do this on a simulator, it has that black scale, that exponential. That's why I don't actually personally see any value in quantum simulators. If you're working on quantum simulators, I don't see why you're trying to use them to solve an exponential problem. There's a caveat to there with the various different approximate methods, which I could go into in a longer talk. The excitement of quantum computing is the blue curve. A lot of these complexities go polynomial. The traditional view and the debate that is in the field is we have to get to what we call a fault-tolerant quantum computer to be able to realize this scaling, which I completely agree with, and the overhead of how much is needed sets that height before we do it. A lot of work is going into that, and in a technical conference, I'd go into all the details of our ideas of error-correcting codes and things like this. But there's an alternative path. In 2017, we put this paper out we call quantum error mitigation. You don't get a free lunch. It's exponential, but the base of the exponential can be different. So you can actually see imagine we're in here where we are today. Yes, before the classical. We'll cross and start to do things that we can't do on our classical machine. And eventually, if we can make this path continuous towards error correction, we can keep running bigger and bigger problems and pushing the limit. So one of the results, this was run on 50 qubits. The top shows quantum correlations. It doesn't matter what they are, but they exponentially decay as a function of how correlated they are. The top is done without error mitigation, and then I apply error mitigation, and I basically get the green curve. So I get all those correlations back. So it shows that it started to work for this very simple circuit, which is just a depth 2 circuit. What we've shown, and these are preliminary results, and in 2 weeks, much more better results will be out, and I advise you all to go check it out. But in these results, we looked at basically a 100 qubit, 127 qubit, up to depth 60 circuit. So 127, 60 depth long. And we studied error mitigation applied to it. And what we see is when you apply error mitigation, it goes back to 1. But more importantly, you can come up with this sort of space where 2 regimes, you can do a classical simulation. Let's call it exactly verifiable at 0, exactly verifiable at pi on 2. And the error mitigation result agrees with the classical result. Then we can actually go beyond that and apply the error mitigation in the middle. And when we apply it in the middle, you've got no exact method that you can actually apply classically, and you can still come up with the value running on a quantum computer. So these results suggest that we're just starting to get to that point where we can start to do something on a classical computer. The details of this was an Ising spin model, a transversal Ising spin model. For those in the room that know what that is, that for information, but I like to think of it as the first case at looking at a physics problem that sort of matters for these computational scientists. So the second path, our no-nonsense path to performance. So one of the things that we focused on when we put out the Eagle is a 127 qubit. We could have done 127 qubits in basically less planes, in a single plane. But what we wanted to do was solve the packaging problem. The packaging problem allows you to bring multi-level wiring through substrate vias and allows you to separate the qubits. So the qubits live in one plane, the I/O lives in another plane, and the readout lives in a third plane. And so why this was so exciting is it really in the Eagle, which was 127, basically I say solved the first step of the packaging problem and allowed us to scale to larger processors. Actually going to 433 qubits was easy. Going to 1,000 is still easy. What actually happens is when you go to 400, no longer is the processor the problem. If I go to my experimental team and tell them to take a traditional wiring and wire up 433 cables, they either quit or it doesn't work. So the I/O started to become a problem. So of course, we invested in how do we actually get much more density? How does componentry, how does different ways, I call this the new supply chain because it doesn't exist today. How can we actually build stuff that will allow us to go faster in scaling out? This, to me, was it looks like a ribbon cable from old printers, a very exciting result because it's basically 70% more increased density at 5 times less price. So for someone that cares about the money, because I spend a lot making these, that's a big deal. And it also has an improvement to keep going further and increase the density. This is what enabled the Osprey processor, 433 qubit processor, which is called IBM Seattle. It's online, people can start to explore it. And if you look at that photo, it's packed. Like, you really cannot fit much more in. So this is why we need to go to bigger fridges, why we need to miniaturize componentries. So scale is obviously the packaging, we've got to keep doing that, but also this componentry and how do we keep building that to allow us to go further. But let's take a different axis. To get to utility, it's not just the size of the system, it's also how well is it performing. So what we also do is every one of our processors, we have another axis we call generations. So for instance, our Falcon, it's up to generation 8, and each one of those generations is a new processor. Our Eagle is up to generation 3. Our standard, what I call core systems, were generation R1 and generation R5 last year. And you see they had, on average, about 100 microseconds of coherence. What you see here is about a 3 times improvement in the coherence in this new processor, so you see this continual improvement. But what I should say, the tail's there. And so people often ask, well, what's going on? How are we making improvements? For the last year, we've put our heads down and focused, and for those physicists that are still left in the room, it turns out it's TLSs. So now you integrate this ability, and we've got this ability to tune the TLSs away. So we can take an overall of all our T1, and we can actually eliminate all those low coherence qubits and just give the good ones. This combined with some of our latest individual devices with coherences of 3 milliseconds and gate fidelities at 3 nines really puts us in a position where we can see, by taking the Heron 1 that is under test, the results are really exciting. I'm looking forward to releasing it at the end of this year. The improved coherence, the improved gates, and the improved tuning really sets this Heron processor up to be leagues ahead, the updated Heron to be leagues ahead of our previous processors. So for all those that are using our processors, look forward to the Heron and look forward to the next ones going forward, because the coherence is only getting better and better. So on the last topic, I only got 3 minutes. If we are going to enable computational scientists, they need to know the processes are going better, but they need the software to continually to get easier. We released this thing we called Qiskit Runtime. The idea of this is it starts to be an abstraction layer where the noise can be included inside classical compute that's built really close to our systems. All our systems now have many classical computers next to it that perform all the error suppression, error mitigation, and what I call runtime compilation. And so the new way of using these processors is not to submit your circuits and have to pick a backend and execute it. It's to actually use these fundamental primitives. I call them sampler and estimator, because when I think about quantum mechanics, even though we want to get to that scale of enterprise developers, what it does fundamentally is it runs some workload and it generates a probability distribution. And if I've got some probability distribution, there's 2 things I can ask: sample from it and get some output, or I can estimate some property. And so by integrating the ability to basically allow the user or these computational scientists to apply what I call a logical circuit, well, virtual circuit, depending on your definition, it can generate a quasi-probability distribution using the best error mitigation methods. Or if you apply a circuit and some observable, you wanted to know some quantity, it can do that. And what this does is it starts to define an interface. And once you start to define an interface, you can ask the next question: how can many of the other industries? So here's an example that we're very proud working with Q-Control, is we can actually start to take that technology, and we're working towards a date in September September this year, to integrate this with just a simple performance management operation. And so now you can leverage this runtime technology and start to integrate other technology as we build towards this stack to make things simpler. So these 3 paths set us up, and I've put some recent results. I don't know what, yeah, the fonts were okay, that basically align where we're going towards this 100 by 100 challenge. So you see down the bottom, we've continued to make progress in the depth, how many instructions. These were all done on our 27 qubit machines. And then as we've built our larger machines, we've taken those methods, and it looks like to me that we're zeroing in on this 100 by 100 plan, where I think that will be the part where we can no longer do something that's easy to do classically. If we then, as we go forward into the future, it's about how do we scale further? How do we bring modularity? How do we actually bring computation and communication, which are separate fields, together? And how do we actually continue to develop this software, this middleware, to make quantum computing easier We've laid that out on our roadmap. I don't have time to go into it today, but you see, this to me starts to build the building blocks towards getting to 100,000 qubits by 2033. On that, thank you.